Hi everybody, John back again. This is a video that I've been wanting to make for a long time. Now this is where I'm going to pick up on the Scandi Prog records that I've been listening to and collecting over the past, best part of this year so far. So it will be, I guess, part three, part four of my progressive rock collected this year. And I'm probably going to need to break this section down into three parts too, because there's quite a lot of records to show and some CDs too. So let's get this started. Now, if you are unaware of what Scandi Prog is, or even, I guess Scandinavia. Scandinavia basically is the loose sort of unification of Sweden, Norway and Denmark. That started off really way back in the early 90s, where you had it seemed to have a very young generation of people, and I think I'm right in saying where this really kind of kicked off in Sweden. I could be wrong. I don't mean to suggest anything other than what this is what I understand. But there's a clutch of bands that kind of, I guess they probably were quite small in their own small respective towns, but there was sort of a hardcore of interest from a lot of people, and they seem to have become legendary, in sort of our living memory at the moment. Everybody's heard of Englagard. I guess if you like progressive rock, Englagard is a band that most people have heard of one time or other. But there were a few others around them that most people perhaps hadn't heard of. The first one I understand is a band called Sinkadus. They sound very much like Englagard, and I think when they eventually released albums, they were sort of often pointed out and called as being copyists. I don't think they were. I've read that although they didn't release their first album until after Englagard, quite some time after Englagard had sort of been on the scene and gone, but they were an existing touring, performing band before that. So I think it's fair to say that when they eventually did release their own music, it probably was actually quite influenced by the style and the music and the sound of Englagard. Another band that was on the scene exactly the same time as when Englagard came out was Landberg. Landberg, although they're definitely sort of Skogs Prog, they were perhaps a little bit more laid back. They had more of a foreboding sort of not depressing. I won't use the word depressing just to sort of explain how they sound, but a sound that is very sort of full of melancholy, a darkness, if you like. They released a few albums, and again, they've vanished. I don't know what they're doing now. I think they sort of dispersed into different groups. And then the fourth band in that clutch is Anekdoten, who are perhaps almost as famous as Englagard in their own way. They've never did sort of stop performing or making records, and they still make records to this day. They perhaps had a bit more of a harder, heavier edge than any of the three other bands that I've spoken about, and for the longest time I've felt their music is quite abrasive. You really have to be in the right frame of mind, and it's only in recent years that I've actually been able to kind of embrace their music and enjoy it. Before, it always just used to, make me feel stressed. Which sounds strange, doesn't it? But I think it's this sort of joy of the mellotron that I've been really sort of drawn to over the past year of listening to progressive rock at the moment. That's really sort of pulled me further into anecdote. So that's basically the basis of where the Scandi Skogs Prog thing started. And since then, it seems to have kind of been picked up in Norway by a whole load of sort of Norwegian bands, and we'll talk about that another time. I'm going to show some records now by bands that are from Sweden, and they do practice this very typical Scandi prog, but also the Skogs Prog thing. Skogs Prog, I guess I would sort of describe as being the style of music that came from that first wave of Swedish bands. It seems to be very much inspired by some of the original early British and perhaps even Italian progressive rock from the early 70s. They often have a very strong presence of mellotron, and I really like the sound of mellotron right now. I mean, some of them use Hammond, some of them use clavinets and all sorts of different things, but mellotron more often than not is very present there in the mix of this sort of the sound of the music. There's also a definite kind of Scandinavian folk music influence. It's somehow woven into that sort of mellotron, almost sort of what's the phrase I'm looking for? Yeah, the phrase I'm looking for is nostalgia. There's a kind of nostalgic feel about them. They almost sound, many of them, like bands that existed in the early 70s, if you like. Most of them didn't, or in fact none of them actually did, but they do a really good job of drawing on that sound and somehow weaving in this sort of Scandinavian folk tradition. You'll hear a lot of flute more often than not in some of these bands. Acoustic guitar can come into it, but other sometimes even other sort of folk instrumentation that's sort of happening in the mix of this sound. What more? A lot of it is fairly instrumental. Vocals do come into it. I think that's a bit of a difficult thing, because some of these bands, they have perhaps a little bit. Some of these bands may try and bring in vocals and be very poetic about it, which isn't an easy thing to do, and some bands do it better than others. I'll talk a bit more about that when I think it doesn't work, perhaps. Anyway, the first one I'm going to show is this. This is a band called Hollow Earth. This is their only album so far. I really hope they make some more. And the album is called Out of Atlantis. A beautiful record. And it was relatively well priced when I bought it. It's on white vinyl. And here's the label. Wonderful sounding record. I discovered this, I guess by chance, I suppose. and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but have a little listen to this now. Do a little needle drop. I discovered this band, and particularly this album, when I purchased a copy of this band's album, and the guy that sold it to me, it's like a independent record salesperson, I suppose, sent me a catalogue with a lot of encouragement to look through the catalogue and find other music of a similar kind of vein that I might find interesting. A lot of it was fairly, I don't know, sometimes you get a lot of these sort of heavy metal bands that try and jump on the bandwagon, and it wasn't really for me, but I could tell just by looking at that album that it was. Anyway, so this is the first album by Augussa, and Augussa are another Swedish Scandi Prog band. Had very much a Skogs Prog feel. I have a second album which I haven't found yet. I haven't been able to get hold of it, but this is their most recent one, I believe. I quite like the cover. It seems to it's still in the shrink. It sort of has a almost like a very sort of woodland Moomin troll type thing. Now here's the label. something that's a little bit odd about this record is that the first track uses a motif quite early on, actually. That, yeah, when I heard it, my ears picked up, and I thought, I recognise that. I know that from somewhere. After a while, I kind of worked out what it was. It's a motif they use in this is very, very similar to the melody of an advert you used to see on British television in the 70s and 80s, advertising Cadbury's Flake. Let's see if I can work in a bit of that in comparison here, so you can see what I mean. I don't know if they stack up next to each other so well, but the melodies are definitely very similar. And I don't know if that was done on purpose or if it was an accident. You know, I don't know. But I always think about that whenever I listen to the music of this record. Another Swedish band is a band called Black Bonzo. This also was very, very well priced. When I found this, I listened to it and thought, wow, you know, what's the catch? What's wrong? And I even think I actually gave a little tip to Pete on the West Coast to have a go. This is it. So it's a beautiful album cover. A really nice Skogs Prog album. Yeah, there's still an essence of that Skogs Prog thing going on. Perhaps it's even a little bit darker in its own way. But this was for sale for, I think, I don't know, £11-12 or something like that. I don't know if it's still that price on Amazon, but I snapped it up as soon as I got it, and yeah, it's actually a very, very good record. Cover's perhaps a bit dark, but yeah, have a little listen to this.
nomination, so the writing said. But I will be the first in line to set things back in place, yeah.
Because I've been driven to investigate anecdote, and again I've invested in one or two of our albums. I had early on sort of copies made by a friend on CD of their first two albums, and those were the two that I didn't really kind of get along with, so they didn't really get much attention from me, but I revisited them just recently and found a new interest in them, so I thought, well, I'll look out and see what else they've got available. And this is their third album, From Within. It's actually considered as one of their better records, actually, and it was quite well priced too. I was surprised. I mean, many of these, the first wave of Skogs Prog that I've been speaking about, it's like their records are like gold dust. Landberg, I mean, I can't even get a CD for less than 50 odd quid. Englagord, they're very expensive to buy. I mean, I don't know why they just don't reissue the records, because there's obviously huge interest in them. Anecdoton's records and albums are relatively well priced and available. Sink a Deuce. Again, I mean, their albums were released on vinyl, on CD, but trying to get hold of those, I've got, again, I shouldn't really be declaring this publicly, but I've got sort of copies of their two studio albums, and because some sort of fanatic that I happened to get talked to was kind enough to send them to me. I didn't ask them to, he just did it, because we'd spoken about the band and the music that I couldn't sort of get hold of. But if you wanted to buy actual sort of copies of their CDs, they're just impossible to get hold of. I don't know why that should be. Now, this is another album by Anecdote. This one of their more recent ones. I think it's come out in 2007 or something. Time of Day. This is, out of all of the Anecdote music that I've heard up until now, I'd say this is most probably the most accessible. They are quite challenging, but this one I've been actually enjoying, purely just for they don't make it too hard to enjoy it. I have their second album on CD somewhere, but yeah, that really is a challenge. That is a record that's going to take a lot of dedication from me, I think. It's quite angular and it's quite jarring. It's quite dark, and yeah, difficult to really sort of relax to. Anyway, so that's this first section of Scandi Prog, with a focus on the Skogs Prog from Sweden. I've got one or two more from Sweden that I'll show, but I just don't have them to hand, so maybe I'll squeeze them into the next bit where I'll talk about some of the newer bands from Norway, and then I think I'll do a third where I'll talk about some of the pickups that I've made from Finland and also Denmark and Iceland. Anyway, thanks everybody, thank you very much.